The Art of War. The crystal chandeliers of the Riverside Grand Ballroom cast dancing light across marble floors as Rosalie Chen adjusted the placement of a contemporary sculpture for the third time. Her emerald dress swirled around her legs as she stepped back to examine the piece from another angle. Tonight's charity gala was crucial. The Children's Art Foundation depended on donations from events like this, and she had spent weeks selecting every painting, sculpture, and installation to appeal to wealthy benefactors. That piece is completely wrong for this space. Rosalie's spine stiffened at the deep, accented voice behind her. She knew that voice. She had heard it exactly 4 times in the past 2 years, and each encounter had ended in a battle of words that left her furious and inexplicably energized. She turned slowly to face Ethan Sterling. He stood there in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his dark hair styled with casual precision, his sharp jawline set in that expression of cool superiority she had come to recognize instantly. His steel blue eyes assessed the sculpture with obvious disapproval. "Good evening to you too, Mr. Sterling," Rosalie said, forcing her voice to remain pleasant despite the immediate spike in her pulse. "I don't recall asking for your architectural opinion on art placement." "You didn't need to ask," Ethan replied, moving closer with that confident stride that somehow managed to be both elegant and commanding. "Anyone with basic knowledge of spatial dynamics can see that piece overwhelms the entryway. People will be distracted before they even enter the main gallery." Rosalie felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from anger or awareness of how his cologne seemed to fill the space between them, she refused to acknowledge. "This piece is meant to make a statement. Art should provoke thought, not just blend prettily into the background like corporate office decoration." "There's a difference between making a statement and creating chaos," Ethan countered, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But then, you've always preferred dramatic impact over thoughtful execution. And you've always preferred sterile control over genuine passion," Rosalie shot back, taking a step toward him. They were now close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. "Tell me, Mr. Sterling, when was the last time anything in your perfectly ordered world actually made you feel something?" For just a moment, something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Something raw and unguarded that made Rosalie's heart skip. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of controlled amusement. "I feel plenty, Miss Chen," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a lower register that sent shivers down her spine. "I simply choose not to let emotions cloud my judgment." "How wonderfully robotic of you. How predictably impulsive of you." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Around them, other guests were beginning to arrive, but Rosalie barely noticed. This always happened when she encountered Ethan Sterling. The rest of the world seemed to fade away, leaving only their verbal sparring and the confusing mix of irritation and attraction that she absolutely refused to examine too closely. A history of hostility. Their first meeting had been at a tech conference 2 years ago. Rosalie had been presenting about digital platforms for emerging artists when Ethan, sitting in the front row, had raised his hand and systematically questioned every aspect of her business model. She had defended her vision passionately, and by the end, half the audience was watching their debate with fascination while the other half looked uncomfortable. The second encounter was at a museum opening where Ethan had donated a significant sum. Rosalie had overheard him telling someone that modern art was just creative people trying to justify their lack of technical skill. She had confronted him, and their argument about the value of contemporary art versus classical technique had lasted 40 minutes and attracted a crowd. The third time was at a friend's wedding where they had somehow been seated at the same table. They had disagreed about everything from the wedding venue choice to the meal selection to whether love at first sight was real or fantasy. By the end of the reception, their friends were taking bets on whether they would kill each other or spontaneously combust. The fourth time was 3 months ago at a business luncheon where they had both been invited speakers. Their contrasting presentations about innovation in their respective fields had basically become a public debate, with the moderator eventually giving up and just letting them go at it. And now, here they were again. Same tension. Same infuriating man. Same confusing flutter in her stomach that she absolutely hated. An unexpected proposition. Rosalie. There you are. Victoria Lancaster, Ethan's older sister, glided over with the grace of someone born into wealth but possessing none of her brother's coldness. Her warm smile eased some of the tension as she linked her arm through Rosalie's. I see you've found my impossible brother, Victoria said cheerfully. Try not to let him ruin your evening with his opinions. Too late, Rosalie and Ethan said simultaneously, then glared at each other. Victoria laughed, a musical sound that made several heads turn. Perfect. Then you're both in exactly the right mood for what I'm about to propose. Victoria, Ethan warned, his eyes narrowing slightly. Next weekend, I'm hosting a business retreat at the Sterling estate, Victoria continued, ignoring her brother's obvious reluctance. I'm bringing together creative entrepreneurs and tech investors to explore new partnerships. Rosalie, your work with digital art platforms is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Ethan has already agreed to attend. I don't think that's a good idea, Rosalie started, but Victoria squeezed her arm. The foundation could benefit enormously from the connections you'd make, Victoria said gently. And between you and me, Sterling Industries is considering a major donation to arts education programs. Having you there to speak about the real impact of art access for children could make all the difference. Rosalie's resolve wavered. The foundation desperately needed funding, and she couldn't let her personal feelings about Ethan Sterling stand in the way of helping kids access art programs. Fine, she said finally. I'll come to your retreat. Excellent. Victoria beamed. Oh, this will be so much fun. Ethan's expression suggested he had a very different definition of fun, but he said nothing. His eyes, however, remained fixed on Rosalie with an intensity that made her skin tingle. As Victoria pulled her away to introduce her to potential donors, Rosalie glanced back once. Ethan still stood by the sculpture, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a fleeting second, she wondered what would happen if they ever stopped fighting long enough to actually talk. Then she dismissed the thought as ridiculous. Ethan Sterling represented everything she rejected: corporate rigidity, emotional control, a life ruled by logic instead of passion. They were fundamentally incompatible. The universe, however, had other plans. And that weekend at the Sterling estate would change everything. The Sterling estate. The drive to the Sterling estate took Rosalie 2 hours north of the city, through winding roads that cut through dense forests before opening onto rolling hills. When the mansion finally came into view, she had to admit it was breathtaking. The stone structure managed to be both imposing and elegant, with ivy climbing its walls and large windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. Nina had insisted on helping her pack, throwing in extra outfits and offering unwanted advice about keeping an open mind. Maybe you'll actually get to know him this time instead of just fighting, her roommate had suggested with a knowing smile. Rosalie had rolled her eyes. The idea of getting to know Ethan Sterling beyond their arguments seemed impossible. They were like fire and ice, passion and control, creativity and structure. What was there to know beyond the obvious fact that they drove each other crazy? Victoria greeted her at the entrance with a warm embrace. I'm so glad you came. Your room is in the East Wing, third door on the left. We're gathering for drinks at 6 before dinner. The room was beautiful in an understated way, with cream-colored walls, antique furniture, and French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. Rosalie unpacked slowly, trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she left the city. She told herself it was just about the networking opportunity, about helping the foundation. It had nothing to do with seeing Ethan Sterling again. She chose a simple burgundy dress for dinner, letting her dark hair fall loose around her shoulders. When she made her way downstairs, she could hear voices and laughter coming from the main sitting room. Ethan saw her first. He stood by the window with James Park, his CFO and best friend, holding a glass of whiskey. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. When their eyes met across the room, something passed between them. Recognition. Awareness. Challenge. "Miss Chen," he said formally as she approached, though his eyes traveled briefly down her dress before returning to her face. "I hope you found your accommodations acceptable." "Perfectly acceptable, thank you," Rosalie replied, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "Though I'm surprised you didn't put me in the servants' quarters given your opinion of my work." James choked slightly on his drink, but Ethan's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "I would never insult the servants that way." "Charming as always, Mr. Sterling." "I try, Miss Chen." Victoria appeared at Rosalie's elbow, steering her away with a gentle but firm grip. "Let's introduce you to the other guests before you two start round 5. When rain falls." Dinner was a lively affair with 12 guests ranging from tech entrepreneurs to creative professionals. Rosalie found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations about innovation and art integration in business. She carefully avoided looking at Ethan, who sat at the opposite end of the long table, though she was acutely aware of his presence. After dinner, Victoria suggested a tour of the estate's famous library. Most guests declined, tired from travel, but Rosalie's love of books won over her exhaustion. She followed Victoria down a candlelit hallway, surprised when Ethan fell into step behind them. "The library was our grandfather's pride," Victoria explained, pushing open heavy oak doors. "He collected first editions for 50 years. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace dominated the 4th wall, and comfortable chairs were scattered throughout. Rain had begun to fall outside, pattering against the tall windows. "I'll leave you to explore," Victoria said, her eyes twinkling with mischief as she glanced between her brother and Rosalie. "Ethan can show you the rare collection if you're interested." Before either could protest, she slipped out, closing the doors behind her. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of rain growing heavier outside. Rosalie moved toward the nearest shelf, running her fingers along the spines of books, trying to ignore how intimate the space suddenly felt. "She's not subtle, is she?" Ethan said finally, his voice closer than expected. Rosalie turned to find him standing just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking less composed than usual. Without the armor of other people around them, something had shifted in his demeanor. "Your sister seems to think we need supervision," Rosalie replied, attempting lightness. "Or maybe she enjoys watching us argue. We do put on quite a show." Ethan moved to the window, watching rain stream down the glass. "Though I wonder sometimes if that's all it is." "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I mean that in 2 years, we've never actually had a real conversation. We just attack and defend, over and over. Don't you find that exhausting?" Rosalie felt her defenses rising automatically, but something in his tone stopped her. He sounded genuinely curious, maybe even tired. "You started it," she said, but without her usual bite. "That first conference. You basically tried to demolish my entire presentation." "I was challenging your assumptions," Ethan countered, but he stepped closer. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it felt personal." Maybe it was. The admission seemed to surprise them both. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm intensified. "Maybe I was bothered by how passionate you were about something I didn't understand. Passion makes me uncomfortable." Cracks in the armor. The honesty in his words disarmed her completely. Rosalie sank into one of the leather chairs, gesturing for him to sit as well. After a moment's hesitation, he took the chair across from her. "Why does passion make you uncomfortable?" she asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the arm of the chair. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his features. "My father was passionate. About his work, his ideas, his ventures. He poured everything into emotional decisions and risky investments. When I was 16, one of those passionate gambles destroyed our family financially. We lost almost everything. Rosalie felt her heart constrict. She had never considered what experiences might have shaped Ethan into the controlled, logical man he presented to the world. My mother left shortly after, he continued, his voice carefully neutral. She couldn't handle the instability. Victoria was 19, trying to finish university while I was still in school. We survived, obviously. I rebuilt the company from almost nothing. But I learned that feelings are dangerous. Logic, structure, control keep you safe. I'm sorry, Rosalie said quietly. I didn't know. How could you? We've never talked about anything real. His eyes met hers. What about you? Why do you fight so hard against any kind of structure or planning? Rosalie took a deep breath. Fair was fair. My parents were scientists. Brilliant, methodical people who planned everything down to the minute. Including me. They had my entire life mapped out before I was born. The schools I'd attend, the career I'd pursue, even the type of person I should marry. She stood, moving to the window to watch the rain. Ethan remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. I tried to fit into their plan. I really did. But I felt like I was suffocating. When I was 23, I dropped out of medical school to pursue art curation. They were devastated. Disappointed. We barely speak now. Her reflection in the dark glass looked vulnerable, and she wrapped her arms around herself. So yes, I resist control. I resist planning. Because to me, those things mean giving up who you really are to become what others expect. I never thought about it that way. Rosalie turned to find Ethan standing right behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. They were close enough now that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth of his body in the cool library air. Maybe we've both been fighting our own demons instead of actually fighting each other, he said softly. Maybe we have. The air between them felt charged, electric. Rain lashed against the windows as the storm reached its peak. Rosalie's heart hammered in her chest as Ethan lifted one hand, slowly, giving her time to step away. When she didn't move, his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gentle touch sending sparks across her skin. Rosalie, he said, her name sounding different in his accent, intimate and careful. I need to tell you something. What? Every time we argue, every heated debate, every moment of tension between us, I've been fighting something else entirely. Fighting what? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. This. He leaned in slowly, his intention clear, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Rosalie found herself frozen, caught between fear and desire. His lips were inches from hers when a massive crack of thunder made her jump, stumbling slightly on the thick carpet. Ethan's hands caught her waist instantly, steadying her, but the movement brought them even closer together. Rosalie's palms pressed against his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as her own. They stood like that, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. We should stop, Rosalie breathed, even as her fingers curled into the soft fabric of his sweater. Yes, we should, Ethan agreed, but neither of them moved. The moment stretched, tension coiling tighter and tighter between them. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they both stepped back, the spell breaking. Ethan cleared his throat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. I apologize. That was inappropriate. No, it was just. Rosalie trailed off, not knowing how to finish. Confusing? Terrifying? The most intense moment of her life? We should get back, Ethan said, his voice strained. People will wonder where we are. Rosalie nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked to the door in silence, carefully maintaining distance between them now. But when Ethan opened the door, holding it for her, their eyes met again. And in that look, Rosalie saw everything he hadn't said. The want. The fear. The same confusion she felt. As she walked past him into the hallway, she knew sleep would be impossible tonight. Because everything had changed in that library. They had seen each other, really seen each other, and there was no going back to their comfortable pattern of arguing and denial. The question now was what came next. Morning after. Rosalie barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Ethan's hands on her waist, saw the intensity in his eyes, heard his voice saying her name like a prayer. She finally gave up at dawn, wrapping herself in a robe and stepping onto her balcony to watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving everything clean and fresh. The gardens below sparkled with raindrops, and birds sang their morning songs. It should have been peaceful, but Rosalie's mind was chaos. What had almost happened last night went against everything she believed about herself and Ethan. They were opposites. Incompatible. Built to clash, not to connect. Yet when he had touched her face, when he had leaned close, she had wanted nothing more than to close that final distance between them. A knock on her door made her jump. She opened it to find Victoria standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. Couldn't sleep either? Victoria asked, inviting herself in and handing Rosalie a cup. The storm kept me up. And possibly the thought of what might be happening in my library. Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Nothing happened. But something almost did. Victoria settled into the window seat, studying Rosalie with the same sharp intelligence her brother possessed. My brother has been different since he met you. More alive, even when he's arguing with you. Especially when he's arguing with you. We drive each other crazy. Exactly. Victoria smiled. Indifference is the opposite of love, Rosalie. Not hate. Passion is passion, whether expressed through fighting or something else entirely. Before Rosalie could respond, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. Emergency video call with Tokyo investors. I have to take this. But we're doing a team-building activity this afternoon. A business crisis simulation. You and Ethan will be paired together. She stood, heading for the door. Try not to kill each other. Or do. Either way, it should be interesting. The crisis. The afternoon's activity gathered all the guests in the estate's converted ballroom, now set up as a mock corporate war room. Large screens displayed financial data, market trends, and a fictional company in freefall. Your task is simple, Victoria announced. Save Tech Industries is failing. You have 3 hours to develop a complete turnaround strategy. Creative teams will partner with financial teams. Rosalie, you're with Ethan. Of course she was. Rosalie caught Ethan's eye across the room. He looked as composed as ever in a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when their gazes met. They claimed a corner workspace, spreading papers and tablets across the table. For the first 10 minutes, they worked in awkward silence, each focused on their respective analyses. But as they began sharing ideas, something remarkable happened. The company's core problem is identity crisis, Rosalie said, pointing at the market research data. They're trying to appeal to everyone and reaching no one. They need a bold rebrand, something that makes a statement about who they really are. Agreed, but the rebrand needs financial backing, Ethan added, pulling up spreadsheets. If we restructure their debt and divest these 3 underperforming divisions, we free up capital for the creative overhaul. That's actually brilliant, Rosalie said, surprised. Your financial restructuring creates the foundation for the creative risks to work. Ethan looked up from his tablet, a genuine smile crossing his face. And your creative vision gives purpose to the financial changes. Structure without passion is empty. And passion without structure is chaos, Rosalie finished, echoing their old argument. But this time, neither was fighting. They were building something together. The 3 hours flew by as they worked in sync, their different approaches complementing rather than conflicting. Ethan would identify a financial constraint, and Rosalie would find a creative solution within those parameters. She would propose an innovative idea, and he would structure it into actionable steps. They challenged each other, but constructively, pushing for better answers rather than just opposing for the sake of opposition. When Victoria called time, Rosalie realized she was standing close to Ethan, both of them leaning over the same tablet, his arm brushing against hers. They had migrated together without noticing, drawn by the collaborative energy. Their presentation was last. As they stood before the group, explaining their integrated strategy, Rosalie felt a strange sense of rightness. This was what they could be together. Not enemies. Not even just lovers. But true partners, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. The other guests applauded enthusiastically when they finished. James caught Ethan's eye and grinned. Victoria looked like the cat who got the cream. Breaking point. Evening fell soft and golden. Most guests gathered on the terrace for cocktails, but Rosalie slipped away to the gardens. She needed air, space to think. The day had shown her a version of herself and Ethan that she hadn't known existed. Working together had felt natural, easy, right in a way that scared her more than any argument ever had. Running away? She turned to find Ethan walking down the garden path toward her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Just thinking, she replied. About this afternoon? About everything. Rosalie sat on a stone bench beneath a pergola draped with wisteria. After a moment, Ethan joined her, careful to leave space between them. We work well together. Better than well. That presentation, the strategy we built, it was good. Really good. It was, Ethan agreed quietly. So why have we spent 2 years fighting instead of finding that? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens as twilight deepened. Because working together means acknowledging what else might be possible between us. And that terrifies me. The raw honesty in his voice made Rosalie's breath catch. She turned to look at him, finding his profile sharp against the darkening sky. 2 years ago, at that conference, Ethan continued, his voice low, you walked onto that stage in a red dress, and you spoke about art and passion and changing the world. You were so alive, so vibrant, so completely sure of yourself. And I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Want. Need. Genuine attraction to someone who represented everything I'd taught myself to fear. Ethan, Rosalie whispered, her heart pounding. He finally turned to face her, and the emotion in his eyes stole her breath. So I attacked your ideas. I picked apart your presentation. I made you my enemy because that was safer than admitting I wanted you from the first moment I saw you. You wanted me? The words came out barely audible. I've wanted you every single day for 2 years, Ethan said, and now his hand reached for hers, his fingers threading through hers with gentle certainty. Every argument, every debate, every time we went at each other, I was fighting the urge to do this instead. He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. This time there was no storm, no surprise, no excuse. Just the two of them in a garden at dusk, finally honest after years of pretending. Tell me to stop, Ethan murmured, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away. I'll never bring it up again. But Rosalie couldn't say those words because they would be lies. Instead, she closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. The kiss was everything their almost kiss in the library had promised and more. Soft at first, tentative, exploring. Then deeper as 2 years of denied attraction poured out between them. Ethan's arms came around her waist, pulling her against him, and Rosalie's hands slid into his hair, holding him close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I need you to know something else," he said softly. "This isn't just physical attraction. I'm not interested in some casual thing. You make me feel alive, Rosalie. You challenge me to be better, to see beyond my rigid rules. I think I'm falling in love with you, and that's terrifying because I don't know how to do this." Tears pricked Rosalie's eyes. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life running from anything that felt like it might control me or change who I am. But you don't make me feel controlled. You make me feel seen. Really seen. And I think I've been falling for you too, even when I was pretending to hate you. So what do we do?" Ethan asked, his hands gentle on her waist. "We take a chance," Rosalie said, surprised by her own certainty. "We stop fighting against this and start fighting for it instead. We figure it out together, one day at a time." Ethan smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more open than she had ever seen him. "Together. I like the sound of that." He kissed her again, softer this time, tender and full of promise. Above them, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. From the terrace, they could hear laughter and music, but in their garden sanctuary, time seemed to stop. 6 months later. The gallery opening was packed with people admiring the new exhibition. Rosalie moved through the crowd, greeting guests and answering questions about the pieces. This was her dream realized, a permanent gallery space funded by Sterling Industries but maintaining complete creative independence. She felt arms slip around her waist from behind, Ethan's familiar warmth against her back. "How's the star curator?" he murmured in her ear. "Exhausted and happy," she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. 6 months had only deepened what they found in that garden. They had learned to balance each other, to fight productively, to blend structure with spontaneity. "Your speech was beautiful," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "Though I still think you could have structured the third point better." "And I think your tie is too boring for an art opening," Rosalie countered, loosening the silk knot at his throat. "Some things never change," Victoria's voice came from beside them, warm with affection. "You two still bicker like an old married couple." "The difference is now we kiss afterward," Ethan said, demonstrating by capturing Rosalie's lips in a brief but thorough kiss that made several nearby guests smile. Rosalie laughed against his mouth, her heart full. They weren't perfect. They still argued about everything from breakfast choices to business decisions. But they had learned that their differences made them stronger together. His logic grounded her creativity. Her passion softened his rigidity. They challenged each other to grow while accepting each other completely. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Ethan pulled Rosalie aside to a quiet corner of the gallery. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "If it's another attempt to organize my design samples with a color-coded system, I'm saying no right now," Rosalie teased. "Not exactly." Ethan pulled out a small velvet box, and Rosalie's heart stopped. "I know 6 months isn't very long. I know we probably should wait longer, be more practical about this. But I've already wasted 2 years pretending I didn't love you, and I don't want to waste another day." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds. "The emerald reminded me of the dress you wore the night everything changed. Rosalie Chen, will you marry me? Will you keep challenging me, inspiring me, and driving me crazy for the rest of our lives?" Tears streamed down Rosalie's face as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply, Rosalie thought about how wrong she had been. Love didn't mean giving up who you were. Real love meant finding someone who helped you become more fully yourself. And somehow, impossibly, she had found that in the last person she ever expected. The man she thought she hated had become the man she could not imagine living without.